Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the pod. My name's Mike Shredder. This is another episode of Shred Stakes. I'm joined by Brandon Hersh, former Duke football player, Seton Hall prep athlete as well, product of Millburn, New Jersey. So, Brandon, thank you for joining the pod today and appreciate you having you on.
Yeah, happy to be here with you, Mike. Excited to get talking a little bit.
For sure. So before we get started with anything football related or, just kind of like your outside interests, just want to get you, a little bit of background about your passion for sports. For those who maybe look at your bio, they can see that you played multiple sports at Seton Hall Prep. Just kind of, maybe to say like growing up in Millburn, maybe like where your passion for sports came from and, why you felt like that when you being an athlete was something you wanted to do.
Yeah, I think I mean everyone starts a bit different. I think for me it was more like a family thing. I had an older brother that was big into sports, and my dad played professional tennis way back when. And you know growing up, that was kind of, you're gonna play sports and get involved in a team and work really hard. And I think it started from that, and then turned into a genuine love for competing and spending time with my brother, and made most of my best friends through sports. So I think that's really the background there.
So let's talk a little bit then about how maybe what you may learn at Seton Hall about yourself led you to, how the recruiting process for football went. Because I know, at least from people I know, it's like a lot of camps, a lot of showcases like that. They get you recruited, but why did you feel like football was the path that made the most sense to go down, kind of when you were in high school? Just because, again, like I said, you played multiple sports. What about football stood out the most?
Yeah, so I think that's where my path is a little interesting. I primarily played baseball and basketball in high school, and for a long time the path for me was baseball. And my story is definitely very untraditional, and me and you haven't had much of a chance to talk about it, but I through high school my brother played college baseball, and I really kind of thought that's what I was going to do. I left high school with a few offers, but just not really the types of things that I wanted in baseball, and ultimately made the hard decision to choose a Duke, knowing that perhaps I might not play sports. And football came onto the table for me super, super late. I'd gotten into Duke, was hoping to walk on to baseball actually. And then ultimately with COVID, they had 65 guys on their roster, 20 outfielders. It was, I was never going to play. It was, not the right situation. And I ended up actually taking a job, like working for the football team. And from that kind of, got close with the right people and was in the right place at the right time. I was doing everything for them, catching punts, throwing passes, like literally all of the things that you can imagine. And the right person caught my eye. And I think that's no different than kind of any recruiting story. Like, you have to be athletic, and you have to be good, and kind of all the things they're looking for, but just kind of have to catch them in the right place and the right time. And for me, it was that story to the fullest. And he basically kind of got a liking into me, and was like, hey, would you want to play? Like, I really think you're could do this. You're a good athlete and seem to do everything right off the field, and we could use people like you. And I obviously jumped at that opportunity. I was like, there's no way this is kind of where I ended up. And the rest is history. I That was in the winter of my freshman year, and basically went home and trained for a few weeks right towards the end of my freshman fall, and came back in the spring and worked out with the team. And a couple weeks in, the head coach called me up to his office. It was like, let's make this a full-time thing. I think you're a great fit. So it was a little bit of trial by fire that way. I didn't have a formal tryout or anything like that. And I also wasn't really on their radar until I got to Duke. So that's, definitely much different than most people's stories, but for me, it was the perfect story. So,
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about maybe just then the transition to being full time
uh,
at Duke? And, to maybe like, from your experience, I don't know, maybe how humbling it could have been. I mean, because, obviously you're a good athlete, but, when you're playing at that level, those are some big time athletes, especially when you're playing cornerback, you're guarding,
yeah,
really high level Division I AC receivers. What do you think was like, what was that experience like, I guess, at first? And then how did you adjust, I guess, over
yeah,
time to, making it like where you, I think, enjoyed the experience?
yeah. The first thing, I think humbling is a perfect way to put it. But I think joining the way I did, I had to like I knew what I was getting into. Like I knew, you know, I knew how good these guys were. I'd seen them play. I thought I could compete, but I also knew that this would be unlike anything I'd ever done. And I think when I first got there, you're in high school, I was used to being kind of in that upper echelons of athletes and more and very comfortable and confident. Like I think for anyone, the transition to Division I sports is very hard. I think for me, particularly in a sport that wasn't my primary sport, it was extremely challenging, but also at the same like anything that I accomplished, whether big or small, my first catch, my first this, everything meant a lot more to me, which was great. Like, I think in a sport where you've done it for so long, you kind of forget those small victories. And for me, that those were impossible to ignore because every single thing I did was at first like, oh wow, I started as a wide receiver, so it'd be like, oh wow, I just ran my first route against an ACC DB. Oh wow, I caught my first pass, my first touchdown, or whatever it is in practice. And I think for baseball, you're not, which I had done my whole life. You weren't getting excited about those little things that happen in a practice or whatnot. It's really the big things, and it was pretty humbling and pretty awesome to be able to appreciate like the little intricacies of the game and find my role as something different. And I think it was a great experience. Just you know, obviously being at the bottom of the totem pole and being humble and open to learn and just seeing how far that can take you. And I think it's a good lesson that, if you do all the right things and are working really hard, there's almost always a place for you on a really high level team. Of course you have to have the goods and whatnot, but all of those little things really matter. And I was able to experience that firsthand. So that's kind of the beginning.
So what, for those who don't know, basically what the ACC football is like, just like, can you talk a little bit about just, what the day-to-day looks like? I'm assuming it's like a full-time job, in addition to the rigorous academics of Duke. Can you kind of explain that a little bit? Because, maybe people don't quite, you know, at least listeners to this show don't hear a lot from ACC athletes. So can you talk a little bit about what the grind is like for that?
Yeah, I mean, when you play ACC football, I think, I float with the idea of saying it's a full-time job. I know nowadays there's lots of like implications behind that and the NIL and everything, but it definitely is a grind. I mean, you're spending, at least 40 hours a week, whether that's NCAA regulated, sport competition time, that's, maybe I think the top line of that is 20, but between, nutrition and film and meetings and all of the other things that it requires just to play the sport. It's definitely a full-time job. And I think Duke specifically does a great job at like, you're there to play sports and you're there to compete at the highest level, but also, if you're choosing Duke, you're also there to to utilize the academic rigor and kind of the off the field stuff, which I think is one of the more important pieces of attending an ACC school. Just the resources and um, the connections that you can make and the things that they do to kind of help advance you off the field are unmatched. But yeah, to get back to your question, training camp is well, let's start before that. Most guys get there around May 16th. I think that's like when the optional dates start. I think May 31st is like when it's required to be there, NCAA mandated. And then, you get a few weeks off in the summer. That's it. And then training camp starts, and that's, it could be there's no regulation on time during training camp for the NCAA. So, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Every day for could be 15 days or whatnot. And then you start the season and that's coincides with when classes start. We were a morning practice team, so you're up in the fives or early sixes, and um, first meeting could be as early as 6:30, and practice won't start until call it 8:30 or 9, and then 2 hour practice ish puts you around 11, and then a meal, and it's noon, and then you start your day of classes. So definitely a grind, and you know that isn't even to mention traveling and all of those things. The hours doing that don't count technically. So it's definitely a full-time job, and you have to love what you're doing, but you get 4 years of it. So you as much as throughout sometimes it's hard, you realize it's a short spurt, and that's what it takes to win, and that's what you want to get out in the end, and you do what you have to do. So
So how does that, you think, helped you, develop, I guess, leadership qualities and being able to prepare for a future career, whether that's in business or sports, whatever it is? Like, how do you think going through that rigor of, the early practices, the grind of, just a lot of travel and, dealing with obviously playing against great competition, all that different stuff. How do you think that helped you maybe from a leadership standpoint and also help prepare you for, whatever future endeavors you're looking to do from here forward?
yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think that's what the biggest thing that you get out of it is. I tell people this all the time. I think, I mean, Duke's an unbelievable institution. I learned so much there, but hands down, the most I learned, um, on or off the field came from football. Like, there's the most translatable skills, for your life, and you know everything came from football. People you interact with, rigor of schedule, mental demand, physical demand. I think now that I've been working, and work is definitely a bit more of a mental grind than it is a physical. And football is definitely 50-50, but it definitely prepares you. I mean, you have to, you can't afford to not be on top of your schedule and your time. You're balancing a lot of things. You have to, yes, there's a lot of structure created for you, but if you're not, utilizing the hours in which football isn't structured properly, then it's just you can't possibly do it all. So that definitely prepares you, and they also prepare. There's a lot of support, to kind of help athletes off their feet and kind of into the process, and you get exposed to extremely high level people and high level knowledge that I don't think most athletes get exposed to, at other levels, just between speakers in the room, and it puts you in conversations that you may not be able to get in otherwise, which was an awesome part of being a Duke football player. Just the speakers and the network, and the kind of, quite frankly, the people who want to talk to you are of a great level, and that definitely brings you up to speed quickly. And I think without that, I'm not exactly sure where I would be today, and kind of, I think the transition to the business world, and the next level is made a lot easier, because you're exposed to that at a younger age and can make those mistakes, and have the support around you from an unbelievable institution to kind of mess up and struggle, or you know you have the people you can meet with regularly, and your coaches, and all of those types of things built in. But it definitely brings you up to speed because you have to. So if you don't, you kind of fall off the train or the wagon a bit. And so that's definitely, I'm very passionate about kind of what Duke has been able to do for me from a business preparation. And at the time when you're going through it, I don't think that's your first thought, but after looking back at it, you're like, wow, this really did prepare me. So it was great.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing. I mean, you don't just think about obviously just the undergrad, which is one of the best schools in the country, but you obviously think about obviously people go there for, medical school, for business school, for law, for
Exactly.
computer science, get the PhD. It's just, Duke has a lot of really good things from an education standpoint. But the one thing I wanted to know a little bit is, like, obviously with your major, you had, management and psychology. So I like that's a lot to obviously unpack in terms of like that. Those are very translatable skills to a business standpoint. So I wanted to get a little bit of just where your interest in maybe going into some sort of business realm, whether I said it's in sports or regular or kind of just business itself. Like, where did that passion come from? Like, did you know that before you went to Duke, or is that something you developed and learned, like, oh, I like this because of classes you took at Duke? And, where do you see that potentially going for you?
Yeah, I think the one thing Duke taught me was that I had a ton of different passions, and was not like, I had the opposite problem of, like, I think some people have a hard time finding, what their thing is. And for me in college, it seemed like, oh wow, this is cool. Oh wow, this is cool. Like, there's just so many things that I was exposed to that registered for me as something I wanted to explore. So I, for the longest time, with my major, I waited to declare until pretty late. I tried to take as many different things as I could and utilize the Duke community. And I think that led me into ultimately consulting because I knew that I'd get this pretty cool third party view of like multiple different industries, multiple different sectors. And, um, you know, I think it's not dissimilar to my take in sports. I think it's super important to start out as a generalist and just, be an athlete or just, in this case, be a learner. And then, from there, just kind of check things off. I like this. I don't like this. I'm good at this. I'm not good at this. But I think it's pretty important to stay away from pigeonholing yourself. And, you know, that's been something that in my life has led me to success and fulfillment. Um, but in terms of my major, I majored in psychology, and that was not on my radar when I got to Duke at all. It was definitely of interest, but I didn't take any psychology courses in high school, and I started off taking some environmental courses, some bio courses, just all of the things, and found that hey, these four classes that I took were all in psychology that I all loved, and looking at the course list, there's about 15 more that I think I could take and enjoy, and then I was like, that's the major I want to do. I'm not necessarily worried about what the outside might see that pigeonholing me into again. I figured if I do what I'm interested in, I can leverage that and combine it with my story to make sense for any job. And I think Duke also does a good job of displaying that in terms of doesn't matter what you major in. Obviously there's engineering and pre-med and those things that's pretty rigid as to what you have to do to reach those requirements. But as far as everything else goes, I think any background can help you and prepare you in different ways for your future. And psychology in particular, just the way people think and the way people make decisions and all of those things will never not be relevant. I mean, business is about people, and I think everything's about people. So that background has certainly not led me to skip a beat in the world that I'm in now. And yeah, so I definitely that open mind has carried me a long way. And I'm in a place now where I'm working consulting and getting to see multiple different things, and hopefully I'll find the ones that I want to do for longer and continue down that path.
Yeah, last question for you is just, talk about you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but just I obviously like the point of this pod is obviously to show like the relevance of sports into everyday life and kind of get an insight as I talked to you before about the student athlete mindset and I guess like their experience. Can you talk a little bit about just what you think being a student athlete? Because like that's, some people just talk about athletes and some people just talk about students, but I'm saying like the balance of both and just the idea of like why do you think it's so important and been so vital for you in your life? You kind of touched on it a little bit, but love to kind of get like it's a final answer, but just what about being a student athlete from high school through now has been so impactful for you, and how do you think it's why do you think it's going to help you build success later on in life?
Yeah. And I think that's a great question. And I feel very strongly about it in that, when you're young, I think sports give kids like something to work really hard at. And I think that's incredibly important. For me, I could always hold a baseball and basketball and say like, hey, this is what I do. Um, you know, I'm not necessarily going to let it fully define me as, you know, I'm just a basketball player, just a baseball player, but it's something I can work really hard at and make connections and kind of grow through. And I think having that structure when you're young is pretty important. To have something that means so much to you and kind of you can go through trials and tribulations and you learn a lot through those moments. And then through college, it's a lot of the same. I think you start to think a bit about, and at least I start to think a bit about like, hey, if I weren't to call myself a football player, like what am I? And I think it's a really important phase to get to. And for me, that happened a lot earlier because I was, I maybe wasn't the best player and knew that at the NFL or the next level was kind of not on my radar. Um, but it definitely gave me something to work really hard at, and it gave me a place to learn, and I was able to utilize it to get myself prepared for whatever the next step is. I think it allows you allows you the ability to deal with adversity and bounce back, which, I think every single person experiences at some point, but sports kind of throws it to you at a very early age. And I think as athletes we can relate to that. But, for me, it got me thinking about, hey, like if sports weren't here, what would my next thing be? And I use sports a lot to jump into new things. Um, Football at Duke gave me the opportunity to join, the student athlete advisory council, or, whatever it was, or attend different ACC events and, explore passions that way. And I think, that's no, I don't think that's can only be achieved through sports. Like whatever your thing is, if you work really hard at it and kind of let it take you to other places, that's important. But I think there's no better vehicle to get to where you want to go than sports. And I do think, sometimes as athletes we do get wrapped up in, that we're just athletes, but the sooner you can realize that sports is something that you do that's mostly, a vessel to get you the experiences and skills and of course you got to love what the game and all of those things, but the sooner you realize that it's about kind of what makes you fulfilled and kind of what gives you the excitement, the better. And that certainly has been the case for me.
I was gonna say that's a great way to put it, and I think that's obviously a big thing that you can learn from just any experience you go through. So I want to say thank you so much for coming on the pod, and I'm glad we were able to do this. And obviously, I wish you nothing but success going forward. And this was great to kind of hear your story and kind of your perspective on things. So thank you so much for joining the pod today.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It was I'm glad to be here and happy to chat with you anytime. And hope everyone can kind of take things away from it. And feel free if anyone listening has anything they want to poke into further, reach out. Happy to chat with anyone.
Absolutely. So for everyone listening, that our episode of Shreds Takes, Brandon Hersh was my guest, former Duke football player, and just great conversation about sports, kind of future endeavors, he's looking to do. And thank you guys again for tuning in. So take it easy.